This morning, we're examining a mass shooting in Highland Park, Illinois, just days after Congress passed the first gun control bill in 30 years. Are even stronger laws needed? We asked former state Senator Wendy Davis in her first discussion about gun control since the tragedy in Uvalde. And a new report describes missed opportunities to take down the shooter at Robb Elementary School. But State Senator Roland Gutierrez has a surprising reaction to what's not included. He joins us this morning. Also, a new poll shows the governor's race tightening, and most Texans think the state is on the wrong track. Should Texas Republicans be worried? We're speaking with consultant Matt Mackowiak. And Texas Democrats are just days away from their state convention. Does the party have a clear message?
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. I'm Chris Lawrence in for Jason today. And we begin the week with the top political headlines across Texas, starting with the Justice Department investigating alleged civil rights violations involving Operation Lone Star. Governor Abbott launched the multi-billion-dollar border security mission last year. ABC News obtained documents that show investigators are looking into whether Texas DPS targeted people at the border based on their race or national origin. Governor Abbott's office says those arrests are fully constitutional. On Thursday, the governor issued a new executive order that authorizes the Texas National Guard and DPS to not only apprehend migrants who cross the border in between ports of entry, but also to take them back to an official border station. Governor Abbott says he issued the order because the Biden administration won't enforce immigration laws. But it's unclear how state authorities will determine which migrant should be transported, and some groups are calling it a political stunt that violates migrant civil rights, with others urging the Justice Department to intervene. And thousands of Democrats will converge on Dallas this week when the Texas Democratic Party kicks off its state convention on Thursday. Democrats will elect leadership and pass the party platform. The convention will be at the Kay Bailey Hutchison Convention Center with gubernatorial candidate Beto O'Rourke a featured speaker. But we start with what happened at a 4th of July parade in a suburb of Chicago. A gunman opened fire as families celebrated, killing 7 people and wounding dozens more. The mass shooting came days after Congress passed significant gun safety legislation for the first time in 3 decades. Some Democrats argue it's not enough, but can they get a tougher bill? We asked former state Senator Wendy Davis, who joins us from Austin. First of all, I want to welcome you to the program and get your thoughts on what we saw earlier this week in Highland Park.
You know, it's just unfathomable, honestly, that this has become a normal in American society. I'm a grandmother now of 2 daughters and 2 granddaughters, and just this overwhelming idea that they're not safe, no matter where they go and how wholesome the activity they're participating in is just incredibly sobering and terrifying at the same time.
Congress recently passed the most sweeping gun reform legislation in 30 years, and yet it doesn't seem as if Republicans or Democrats are celebrating. Why is that?
You know, for me, it felt a little bit like 1 step forward, 2 steps back, because of course that very same week, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a decision that limited the way that states could have safer communities and could make sure that we had more responsible gun ownership. So it was a bit of a move forward. And in that way, it's absolutely worth celebrating because it's been decades, literally, since we've seen any forward movement in Congress. But at the same time, it just feels so little compared to the magnitude of the problem in this country.
Do you think there's an appetite from progressives in the Democratic Party who generally want to swing for the fences to that kind of slow, deliberative build to achieve something that may be years, if not decades down the road?
The desire to just burn it down and find quick solutions is real and strong. And I feel the same way. But I've been involved in this long enough to understand that we only have the ability to get through and change issues like this based on our political systems. And if we play a vital role in doing that, we can move the needle forward.
Do you think along those lines that the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade will take away a rallying cry on the Republican side and perhaps motivate more Democrats to turn out?
I think it will be very motivating, not just for Democrats, but for people across the political spectrum, independents and moderate Republicans as well. Right now, of course, most people are really concerned, justifiably so, about the economy. And the question lies ahead. Will that concern outweigh the concerns that people might have about the safety of their families because of what's been happening with these military assault style weapon murders? Will it be enough to overcome people's concerns about the restriction on reproductive rights? You know, we won't know really until November, the first election that we'll have an opportunity to really express our upset.
Ms. Davis, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chris.
A new report by the Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training Center says authorities missed several opportunities in Uvalde to stop the shooter before he got into the school and killed 19 students and 2 teachers. One officer sought permission to shoot the gunman outside, but got no answer. So let's bring in Ian Mitchell. He's the senior managing editor for the Texas Tribune. And Ian, what should we take away from this?
I mean, it's extremely confusing and frustrating, I think, for a lot of folks, because since this report came out, and as you mentioned, the main takeaway was that there was a Uvalde officer who had sought permission to shoot the gunman before he entered the school. That is now being disputed by the mayor of Uvalde, who's put out a statement after this report came out saying that the report had inaccuracies and questioned this particular thing. So I think what we're left now is still a bunch of confusion about what actually happened. So the word of the day continues to be confusion and not understanding what really happened.
And Ian, your publication and ProPublica are both reporting that Operation Lone Star is now subject to a federal investigation. What does this mean for the program and for Governor Abbott?
Yeah, so this is a civil rights investigation that we found out about, and it's basically looking at whether people were confined based on race, and so there's aspects of how the operation is going. As far as the operation this week, Governor Greg Abbott has announced that an initiative to encourage state authorities, whether it's DPS troopers or people who are deployed under the National Guard to apprehend migrants and take them back to ports of entry. So, nothing looks to be slowing down in terms of the initiative, but certainly there's going to be another, it continues to be the latest chapter in the state versus feds battle over this.
All right, Ian, thank you. We're going to see you again in just a second, but first, coming up, we're going to dive a little deeper into that new report from Uvalde. State Senator Roland Gutierrez reacts to that report about missed opportunities outside Robb Elementary School. Welcome back to Inside Texas Politics. The Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training Center released a new 26-page report on the school shooting in Uvalde. It describes several missed opportunities to stop the gunman before he killed 19 children and 2 teachers. The report describes a Uvalde police officer who took aim at the shooter outside the school but asked permission to fire and missed his chance to possibly stop him. State Senator Roland Gutierrez represents Uvalde, and we spoke with him in the wake of this report being released. Well, first of all, Senator, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Senator, I want to talk about this 26-page report that shed a lot of light on the response there in Uvalde. What were some of your prime takeaways after getting a chance to look at it?
The report had very, very little new information. We've known all of this. If anything, the report was wrong. It indicates it's commissioned by DPS to this nonprofit alert. It mentions DPS troopers 5 times in the entire 27 pages. It doesn't mention the federal government who actually went in and killed this person, doesn't mention them at all or very little. Says that there was one DPS trooper in the hallway. McCraw testified in his Senate testimony that there was actually 12. That's what they had to admit to a newspaper in San Antonio. That report is just much more of the same. Again, adding insult to injury to a community that is begging for the truth. And I think that you and I know the truth. I think that what we had here was human error, system failure, just a calamity of circumstances that kept officers from going in. We had communications that didn't work in that room. All of those speak to some larger, manifest, systemic errors within the state of Texas.
So you think this report lays far too much of the blame at the local police officers and not enough at the state or federal level?
What happened on May 24th was a systemic failure on every different law enforcement agency that was there. There was 8 law enforcement agencies in the hallway. None of them were listening to Pete Arredondo because there was no radio communications at all. The audio footage that they put out for body cams is only what people around you hear. The radios didn't work at all. And so how are we supposed to believe that he's the incident commander? In McCraw's own testimony, he testified that his staff was not listening to Pete Arredondo. And so if they're not listening to this guy supposedly give orders, then who is? Who is giving orders? There is one thing in this report that is mentioned towards the back end. It says that there was no incident command. That's the biggest thing, right? Nobody had command and control, not DPS, the largest law enforcement entity on this scene with 91 officers was the Department of Public Safety. Greg Abbott has spent $10 billion over the last 7 years on the border for this supposed Operation Lone Star. Operation Lone Star failed these kids. His officers, 12 of them were in that hallway. Not one of them went into that room.
Why do you and Mayor McLaughlin want the Uvalde district attorney to be taken away from overseeing this victims' compensation fund?
Well, for 2 reasons. Number one, she's got a conflict if she's running a criminal investigation, interviewing those same witnesses, and on the other hand, having a purse, a bag of money to contribute. Nevertheless, she's not doing a whole lot of money. And then the second reason is that she's just not doing a very effective job at it. She doesn't have the human manpower to be able to do this. TDEM, the Texas Department of Emergency Management, can do this in a faster, more efficient way. And that's our hope, that we can get a case manager per each family.
What are some of the specific problems that you're hearing from families in Uvalde in terms of this fund?
Now, as I stated earlier, what's happening right now is that families are getting 2 weeks of lost wages. That's simply not enough. Families are staying at home with their children that don't want them to go back to work. Families that lost children are simply shattered and devastated. The amount that you can claim is upwards to $50,000. We should try to amplify and get to something that is more substantive rather than poor-boying families and giving them a few $100s.
Senator, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Take care. Be well.
We're now 4 months out from Election Day, and Governor Abbott is leading Beto O'Rourke by 6 points, according to a new poll by the University of Texas Politics Project. It also shows 59% of Texans think the state is moving in the wrong direction. We get some insight from political consultant Matt Mackowiak, the president of Potomac Strategy Group. Well, Matt, thank you for joining us. I want to dive into this poll at 6 points now separating the governor from Beto O'Rourke. Is that close enough to worry?
Well, we're obviously still, 3.5, 4 months out. We're in the dog days of summer. And when you look at the issues that have come before the voters, the poll respondents, you've had some divisive issues come up. Obviously, there's a lot of divisiveness surrounding the border. The issue of Roe versus Wade is a divisive issue. You add all that up, and you could see why Abbott may be taking on a little bit of water at the moment. The question of a poll is only going to be as good as its sample. And when you're in the summer, you're testing registered voters. You're not testing likely voters. So that enthusiasm gap, which we presume has benefited Republicans in the current political environment, is not being accounted for. One of the big question marks is whether the Roe versus Wade decision, the Dobbs decision, is likely to increase the enthusiasm Democratic voters feel and maybe change the political environment somewhat. I still believe that Abbott's going to win by a pretty solid margin, 8 points on the low end, 12 points on the high end. Depends a lot on what the fall looks like. But Beto has narrowed the gap a little bit. And that does present a scenario where the race could potentially be competitive. I don't think it will be, but we'll see.
How do you account for that gap in his electoral support, yet at the same time, the voters don't seem to align with him on some issues?
Yeah, I mean, my answer to that would be if you look at past elections, there just isn't much evidence that Abbott is not in the mainstream of the overall electorate in terms of his view on most issues. What we don't know is whether the Uvalde massacre and the Roe versus Wade Dobbs decision are going to somehow change the electorate heading towards the November election. My guess is those issues are going to be blips, they're going to be short-term blips that will change opinion in the short term when they're in the news, but they'll fade over time. Look, Democrats have never had success in Texas running statewide on a gun control platform. It just doesn't work in Texas. I'm sort of dubious that Uvalde is going to somehow change decades and decades and decades of public opinion on that issue, at least voter opinion on that issue.
It almost seems as if they're running two different campaigns. Beto O'Rourke obviously highlighting abortion, highlighting access to guns and gun reform, while the governor seems to want to focus on the economy and the border, and they're not even speaking the same language at this point.
I guess we'll know the Democrats have concluded that their current strategy is not working if they pivot back to talking about the economy. The problem is it's a tough issue for them to talk about. They don't want to distance themselves from the White House. They don't want to criticize the president's policies and decisions. And they want to basically feed their base. They know the more they feed their base, the more they can raise money from small dollar donors across the country and even some major donors. But this most recent poll showing Beto down only 6, I think, is going to help him raise money. I know there's no doubt he's been using that just in the last couple of days since the polls come out. The challenge is going to be when you go from registered voters to likely voters. I think this race is going to change.
Matt, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
Well, this week, Democrats host their state convention. Do they have a clear message going into the midterm elections? We discuss that next on the Roundtable. Time now for a Reporters Roundtable to put some of these headlines in perspective. Ian is back, and of course, we're joined each week by Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer here at WFAA in Dallas. Ian, first to you, that new poll seems to show Texans aren't all that happy. Nearly 60% think the state's on the wrong track, but they don't necessarily trust the Democrats to run it yet. What's your takeaway?
Well, obviously, we're also in the midst of a midterm election year too, and we have a Democratic president. And there's usually midterms are usually tough for the party in the White House. I mean, there's frustration all around, and as we've seen, in past elections too, a common factor can deal with such frustration can be apathy when it comes to the polls. So we'll see what happens and what the headlines are closer to the election. But there's just a lot of unhappiness with all of our elected officials.
Yeah, but how do you make sense of the dichotomy in those numbers?
I don't see as much apathy as I see disgust. I think when you look at the lieutenant governor's race and you see that rather than people don't want to vote for Dan Patrick, but rather than vote for the Democrat, 11% of the people in the poll chose a libertarian they've never heard of. That tells me that people are disgusted with both parties. There's a great discontent with the way Texas is going, that people don't see the Democrats as fixing things.
And Bernadine?
You know what? Both parties do have work to do. I think that at this point, it's particularly during the midterms that there's time. There's time for the Democrats to at least get some kind of message to convince voters that they will do a better job. But at this point, they're not doing it. And we'll talk about this later on in the next few minutes. But Democrats have a job to do, and Republicans do as well.
Also want to, obviously to that point, Bernadine, we're in the middle of some pretty intense debates right now over abortion, guns, the border. This week, Texas Democrats going into their state convention here in Dallas. Ian, are they going to come out of this with any sort of clear message?
Well, they'll need to, because there are clear issues that they can run on and resonate with, and so hopefully for the Democrats, for their sake, they're going to find some commonality, because there's a lot of intra-party divisions within the Democratic Party as well.
And Bud, what do you think? What do they need to come out of this saying to voters?
It's tough to tell what their message is at this point. Beto has begun a lot of his speeches with, talking about a woman's choice and about LGBT rights. Those may not be the issues that win back a majority of the voters. You look at the Texas Democrats website, all they tell you is we need to take back Texas and win Texas and elect more Democrats, but it doesn't tell you at all what they're going to do if they win.
Bernadine?
Well, I think we'll see that once their convention is over, because that's where they need to come together. And whatever message they come up with, and I'm sure that they'll do polling and make sure that it's the right message for them, they all need to be saying the same thing. I think that the Republicans are way ahead in terms of coming up with messaging, staying on messaging, and saying the things that voters want to hear. And that's going to be a challenge for Democrats. We'll see after next week if they're up to the challenge.
Yeah, because the weeks do tick by, and pretty soon it'll be Labor Day, and obviously a lot more people will be starting to tune in to what's going to happen there in November. Bernadine Steptoe, Bud Kennedy, Ian Mitra, thank you all so much for your perspective.